If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. What's the most creepy, unlikely, or unexplainable occurrence to ever happen to you? I am the oldest of 6 kids. One passed away as an infant. My 2 younger sisters and one of my younger brothers used to like to push their mattresses together on the floor downstairs on the weekends and watch movies or sleep. My youngest brother still slept in his crib upstairs as he was still too young to roam the house at night, as we had 2 staircases leading to the basement that he could easily fall down. One evening, as my sisters and brother were about to fall asleep watching a movie, my youngest brother appeared at the bottom of the stairs. It startled them awake and confused them, as he should have been in his bedroom sleeping. They asked him what he was doing. He just smiled, then turned around and ran around the corner to the staircase. My sister followed, but when she reached the bottom of the staircase, he wasn't there. It wasn't possible. The kid had to climb stairs on all 4s, and it took him minutes to climb them. Confused, my sister ran upstairs and asked my parents what my little brother was doing downstairs. They checked on him, and he was sleeping in bed. All 3 of my brothers and sisters cried hysterically that night because they knew what they saw and it didn't make sense. They still swear by it today. I go to a small town in Scotland for university. It's a pretty old university, and a lot of the buildings in the town are made of stone and date back a couple hundred years, including mine and my friend's flats. Her flat is this really old stone building near the sea, but the inside is super dark with high ceilings that never really get lit all the way, and it's always cold. Then again, Scotland. The house makes these weird noises at night too, like it's settling into hell, and it just feels like someone's watching you. Anyway, I was staying at my friend's a couple of weeks ago after a quiet night in. I was asleep in my friend's bed before she came home from work, and I had this horrible night terror that some girl in a white dress was going to cut off my legs. My mate gets home, and apparently I was just saying, "Not my legs, no, not my legs." When she asked what I was on about, I sat up and said, "No, that wasn't me, just go to sleep, don't worry." Which I don't recall doing and have never done before during a night terror. But the weirdest part was that as soon as I got back to sleep, her flatmate let out a blood-curdling scream and said she felt like her bottom half was being cut off and couldn't move. She said she had the weirdest pain in her legs the whole next day. Unbeknownst to us at the time, our friend had stayed alone in the flat for a week before everyone moved in and said she'd seen a little girl in white at the top of the stairs before she turned the light on. Which is great. I was 21, and I was going camping with some friends. My boyfriend and I couldn't make it to the site until much later. We weren't camping at a campground. It was in the middle of the woods, near a farming community. You had to drive down a dirt road for a while to get to the spot. When my so and I pulled up around sunset, everyone else was packing their shit. They said that they saw something crazy, and they didn't want to camp there anymore. I asked what happened, and they said they were walking around the tree line and picking up wood for a fire when some creature came out of the bushes and charged at them. They said it was about 4 feet tall, gray, hairless, walked on 2 legs that were shaped kind of like kangaroos, and had long fangs that stuck out of its mouth. I thought they were ducking with me. I said whatever, and we all decided we were going to go to my house and chill for the night. I lived the closest to the area. I said I was going to go ahead and leave and pick up some beer. When I got to the end of the dirt road and turned onto the street, this thing was in the street. It ran off as soon as we turned towards it, but we were able to get a decent look at it. I have never been a believer in Bigfoot or the Chupacabra, but I believe that this thing might be what people are calling the Chupacabra. I never really told anyone about it because I didn't want to be labeled crazy. 4 years later, I was talking to a friend, and he told me that they came across this weird creature when they were hunting. It was exactly what we saw. My brother Mark was 12 years old when my grandfather in Glasgow, Scotland, took ill and wasn't expected to survive. My parents took the next available flight to Scotland and had to leave us kids behind in Chicago. I was too young at the time to understand what was happening, but Mark had figured out that our grandpa Joe was dying. Mark was very upset by the news and was heartbroken that he couldn't go to see our grandpa one last time. I was too young to have had the privilege of knowing Grandpa Joe, but from the stories I have heard, he was a very loving man who adored his grandchildren. A few days after my parents left, Mark went into the basement of our house to grab clothes from the drying machine. When he reached the bottom of the stairs, he froze. About 30 feet away from the foot of the stairs, there is a doorway to a utility room in the basement. Just as Mark reached the bottom of the stairs, he saw a figure step into view. It was Grandpa Joe. He was smiling at Mark and holding a white box. He didn't say anything, but he smiled and then walked past the doorway and was gone. My brother ran back upstairs in hysterics, telling our babysitter that he had seen our grandfather and needed to talk to my parents. The babysitter reluctantly let my brother call Glasgow, and when he reached my parents and told them the story, they tried to soothe him and tell him that everything was okay, that his imagination was playing tricks on him because he was worried about Grandpa Joe. Grandpa Joe had passed away while my parents were on their flight heading to Glasgow, and my parents didn't have the heart to tell Mark the sad news over the phone. Fast forward to 20 years later, my brother and I are visiting my mom in Florida. One night we stayed up late talking about family, and eventually the conversation turned to our Grandpa Joe. After reminiscing about our grandpa and his good nature, my brother said to my mom, "You and Dad never believed me when I told you that I saw Grandpa in the basement." My mom looked puzzled and asked Mark, "When did you see Grandpa Joe in the basement?" My mom had remembered talking to Mark the morning that she and my dad arrived in Scotland, but she hadn't remembered the specifics of Mark's story. Mark retold the story, but this time when it was over, my mom was speechless. After a few moments, she broke the silence and asked Mark to describe the box that Grandpa Joe was holding. Mark said that it looked like a white rectangular box that was about 3 feet long and had a width and height of about 1.5 feet. Something about his description of the box made my mom get tears in her eyes. She collected herself and then told us both, for the first time, that one of our aunts had a stillborn baby at almost the same time that my grandpa passed away. The child and Grandpa Joe were buried in the same grave, and the child was buried in a small white coffin. Well, the one that always stuck out was a few years ago. I woke up in the middle of the night from a dream where I heard someone screaming bloody murder. So I sit up in my bed, and I'm just sitting there when, all of a sudden, it's the same bloody murder scream as before. It's coming from my older sister's room right down the hall. So I jump up out of bed and run to my door, and as I'm almost there, it slams shut in my face. I rip it open after pissing myself off to see a dark, empty hallway. I flip on the light on the wall, and it's empty. I run into my sister's room and ask her what the hell she's screaming for, and she says that she woke up to her dog with its head up, growling at the hallway through her open door. So she stares out into the hall for a minute when she sees something dark and big crawling down the hall on all fours towards my room. So she screams once, and it stops and looks at her. She screams again, and that's when I hop up. According to her, it ran towards my room, and she heard my door slam. So my folks and I all go around searching the house for open doors, windows, or whatever. And we don't find anything. In the mid-1990s, I was the program manager for an evening MA program in counseling psychology. This school had an emphasis on blending the spiritual with the study of psychology, so one night an authority on the Kabbalah came to give a lecture. I wanted to know more, so I attended. We were all gathered around on pillows in a horseshoe semicircle, with the lecturer seated inside the circle but towards the back, where the opening was. I was seated at the 9 o'clock position. About 15 minutes into the lecture by this very bookish but very ordinary scholar, I realized I had been staring at a large reptilian creature that was floating behind and above her and had been kind of going in and out of focus for some time. Really creepy, with jowls and scales and a very ancient feel to it. Why I didn't react in any way, I will never know. Then I noticed that at the 6 o'clock position in the circle, there was a group of 3 young women, one of whom was leaning on the shoulder of another and quietly sobbing, but all 3 looked horrified in varying degrees. As did the guy across the circle from me, who had a WTF expression on his face. The lecture ended, and the professor thanked the lecturer who left. That's when the 3 women, one in particular, just lit into this professor, saying, "How could you just allow this to happen? And how could you bring that thing in here?" Stuff like that. Then other people started piping up, "Yeah, I thought I saw something. Yeah, something felt really creepy." The professor looked at me, and I said, "Yeah, I saw it." The class broke up, and some of us walked out to the parking lot together and stood there in the dark discussing what we saw. We all saw the same thing. Our descriptions all jibed. Once home, I tried to figure out where I had seen something like that before. And then I remembered. The thing I had seen in the classroom looked just like the Jabberwocky in John Tenniel's illustration of Lewis Carroll's poem, The Jabberwocky. The next day, I showed the illustrated poem to the 3 young women, and the same girl who had been crying started to do so again. We had all seen the same thing. 1994 I was 9 years old and on vacation with my aunt and cousins in Idaho. I believe a lake was called Round Lake. My cousin Angela and I decided to swim to the end of the lake and back. On the way back, in the middle of the lake, my cousin Angela freaks out and starts pointing over to the side of the lake. I couldn't really understand what I was looking at. It looked like 2 humanoid-looking pale people with no clothes but no facial features either. Maybe it was the backside of them? Anyway, one was about 7 feet tall and the other was 3 feet, and they were holding hands. We swam fast to the dock, and when we looked back, they were gone. To this day, my cousin and I talk about what it was, and my memory of them still stands out. I'm just glad I didn't see them by myself, at least I had someone there. I saw what looked like a person change into a deer. I've only told this story one other time because it sounds so ridiculous. Even just writing that first sentence has me shaking my head. But here it is. A few years ago, I lived in a very rural area in western Georgia. I worked at night, so I was used to driving around in the very early hours, even on my off days. One particular night, as I was making my way down a winding, isolated road, I saw, from several yards away, the silhouette of an adult man walking across the road. He was just barely visible in the beams of my headlights, so I couldn't see any details. But it was definitely a person on two legs with a clear stride. In an instant, he stopped, pivoted towards me, turned back to his original direction, and then, in one fluid motion, leapt forward onto his hands and galloped the rest of the way across the street. All of this happened very quickly. I was driving about 40 miles per hour, 64 kilometers per hour, originally, but I gunned it once I saw a guy jump on all fours. Anyway, when I reached the point where I had seen him cross the road, I hit the brakes and peered into the woods. What did I see? The ass end of a white-tailed deer running away. Now, I know deer will sometimes rear up on their hind legs while fighting. And as awesome as it is to imagine two deer battling it out in the middle of the road, I don't think that's what happened. I swear it was a person, and then it was a deer. I don't talk about it because it doesn't make a damn bit of sense. But I do know this, it's easy to be skeptical and rational when we live in our comfortable cities and suburbs, but weird shit happens, and you usually don't come across it until you find yourself out in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, by yourself with no other witnesses to back up your bizarre experiences. A good friend and I were flying through the Canadian Rockies in the vicinity of Golden, BC. We were both private pilots looking to build time. We were flying parallel to a string of sharp mountain peaks connected by smooth saddles. In the middle of one of the saddles, which was completely snow-covered, was an uncovered grayish object. It stuck out since I couldn't figure out why this rock was uncovered in the middle of this pristine snow. As we approached, we saw that it wasn't as gray as it had first appeared but more brown. Okay. That makes sense, I thought. It's a bear. Strange that it was where it was, high above the tree line, but whatever. As we got even nearer, it started moving away and down the other side of the mountain. Nearer still, it was obvious to the both of us that this bear, brown from head to toe, was now in full run. But it was running in an upright, full stride with a human's gait and arms swinging. My friend and I kind of sat there in silence, then tried to determine a way to fly to the other side of the mountain. Now we had our camera at the ready. Unfortunately, the terrain was too closed in and dangerous to fly into. Years went by, and I started to doubt myself. Recently, I asked my buddy. "Remember that time we flew through the Rockies?" I asked. "You mean when we saw the Sasquatch?" He answered. "Okay, good. It was real. Once, when I was out driving, I saw this guy on the side of the road. He had parked his car and brought a chair to sit on. He didn't look weird or anything, but his car was unique. It was completely covered in hardcore porn. Like he had ripped pictures out of random porn magazines and glued them on there. On the roof of the car was a plank with a flower pot on it. It was secured by two nails that were sticking down through the roof. I stopped the car, rolled down my window, and said, "Nice weather for a day out." He said, "Sure is." And I continued on towards town. He was gone once I came back down the road a few hours later. The second story is when I got chased by something through the woods. I was out walking in the forest, a kilometer or so from our summer house. Suddenly I saw the, admittedly young, trees bend in front of me. They kept bending like that in a straight line towards me. 12-year-old me turned around and ran as fast as chubby 12-year-old me could run, not very fast. But still. I could hear footfalls and the trees bending even faster behind me. After 300 to 400 meters, I came back to where I left my bike and continued home from there as fast as I could. I still don't know what it could have been. Not a moose, I would have been able to see it, possibly a bear. Scary as duck, though. I enjoy running in the mornings to get a quick workout before school. So, one day I'm on my way home, running on a secluded forest trail that runs at the base of the mountain next to the zoo, parallel to the motorway. Also, it's pretty dark, with the sun giving off a very light blue tint to everything, twilight color correction status. So there I am running when I spot something off in the distance, approximately 30 yards, 30 meters, away. I kid you not, it looks like one of those uncooked Thanksgiving turkeys. As I slowed down to a walk, I saw this thing jog a bit, then stop. Then, it slowly turns around and seems to look at me, then gets on all fours and sprints into the trees. I don't even know what I saw. But it honestly looked like a turkey, feathered and all that, running. Like some lame CGI thing in real life. It was about up to my knees, about 1.5 feet, and since it was running next to the wooden fence, I got a crude scale from that. But yeah, that's mine. My parents thought I was crazy at first, but after they saw how serious I was, they said it was probably a squirrel or something. But this was too big to be that. And it was ducking walking on 2 legs. When I was little, we lived in a house where way too many scary things happened. One night, I was so thirsty but too scared to go to the kitchen to get some water. 2 minutes pass, and I hear the tap turn on in the kitchen. I think, great, someone's up, I'll get up now. I was around 5. I go to the kitchen, and I see my dad sitting on the kitchen bench by the sink, just turning it on and off repeatedly. I said, "Dad?" He literally looked up at me, climbed off the bench, and started walking towards me, asking for a hug. The thing was, he was moving weirdly, kind of like paper? Like a flag, a piece of material floating in the wind. He was walking towards me, all flimsy and unbalanced. I flew to my parents' bedroom, screaming for my mom, and jumped into their bed only to find my dad there, still in bed. I have way too many scary stories, but here are a few. 1. As young as I can remember, basically since I was still sleeping in a crib, every single night while I was trying to fall asleep, a tall, slender shadow figure would always walk from my parents' room into my room and would stand next to me as I was laying in my crib or bed. From where my room was, I had a clear view of the doorway that led to my parents' room. It would just stand there, watching me sleep. There were plenty of times where I would try to fool it by pretending to sleep or hiding under the covers, and sometimes it would work. It would start walking back towards my parents' room, but if it saw me moving, it would turn to look at me, walk back, and stand right next to me again. One night I couldn't sleep, so I went to sleep with my parents. I watched the shadow figure walk out of their walk-in closet and out the door into the hallway, and I assume it went into my room and didn't see me in my bed because it came back into my parents' room and stood in the doorway staring at me for a few seconds before it went back into the walk-in closet. As far as I know, it never hurt me, and it didn't feel like something bad, but I was, of course, scared because I was young. This happened every single night up until my parents separated when I was 12. This part is a bit TMI, but I used to think it was my dad's soul leaving his body to check on me during the night because he wasn't the nicest and would physically abuse me as well as constantly yell at me throughout the day, so maybe this was his conscience feeling bad and making sure I was okay. The only reason I thought this might be what the shadow figure is because it looked like his shadow. For reference, he's 6 feet 4 inches and very skinny, and the shadow figure looked to be his exact height and weight. As creepy as it sounds, I'm 20 now and kind of miss seeing the shadow figure. 2. One night I was in my mom's bedroom, lying on her bed, watching TV. I started feeling really cold, and the whole atmosphere in the room changed. It felt very tense, and I started getting anxious. After a few minutes, I look over towards the hallway that leads to the bedrooms, bathroom, and laundry room, and I see a little girl standing in the entrance to that hallway. She looked like the little girl from the movie The Grudge, long black hair covering her face, a long white dress that looked like it was damp, and she was looking down. I was completely frozen in fear, and I couldn't move. Another minute goes by, and she's still standing there. I was finally able to start rubbing my eyes and pinching myself because I thought I might have been hallucinating or something, but I wasn't. She was still there. She was there for a few minutes and then slowly started disappearing. When she fully disappeared, the room went back to feeling normal. My mom was sleeping on the couch across from me, so I ran to wake her, and we both went to bed. I was too scared to go to my room by myself. For the record, this happened somewhere around 7th-9th grade. When I was a teenager, we moved into an old Victorian-era house in Missouri. It was gorgeous, and I was very excited to move in. The place was not outwardly creepy at all, it was just charming. One night I was staying up late watching TV, wide awake since I was a night owl at the time, just kicking back. From where I was sitting in the living room, I had a clear view of our entryway, which led to a staircase to the second story. The entryway was lit. Suddenly, I catch some movement out of the corner of my eye. I turn, and there in the entryway I see a blonde woman in a powder blue Victorian-style dress. She is walking and doesn't acknowledge my presence. She walked out of our kitchen, into the entryway, and then up the stairs. I had my eyes on her the whole time, and she looked completely real, if that makes any sense. She didn't look like a ghost, but like a living person. I just stared for a moment, then turned back to the TV. I have no idea why, but I wasn't at all scared. In fact, I felt eerily calm. Shortly afterwards, I went upstairs to go to bed, and of course she was nowhere to be seen. Another time, I woke up a little late in the morning and walked downstairs. My dad is an early riser, so he had already been up and made coffee. I could smell it in the air. I went past the kitchen without looking in and sat down in the living room. From the kitchen, I hear my dad call out, "Well, what are you doing?" in a playful voice. "Nothing much, just waking up," I replied. There is silence after this, but my dad isn't the best conversationalist, so I think little of it. I got up to go see if he was cooking breakfast and found the kitchen empty. At this point, I think it may have been my brother speaking to me, so I poked my head up the stairs and asked my brother if he had said anything to me. A reply in the negative came back down the stairs at me. He had been silently playing video games the whole time. Then my dad walked in the front door with a dozen donuts, wishing me a good morning. When I was about 10, I was staying at a resort with my family. One night, I was sleeping in a room with my dad, but his snoring became too much for me to handle. So at about 2 a.m., I walked out into the kitchen to go into the room with my mom and sister, so I no longer had to hear this snoring. As I walked through the kitchen, I saw my sister looking out the window with her back to me. She was wearing a white nightgown I had never seen before. I didn't think anything of it. I asked her what she was doing, and she didn't reply, so I went into the other room. Once I got into the other room, I climbed onto the bunk above my mom. While doing this, she woke up, and I asked her what my sister was doing out in the kitchen. She said she had no idea what I was talking about because my sister was asleep in the bed next to us. I looked over to see my sister sound asleep. I was frozen in fear and slowly hid under my covers. One night, me and two friends were all walking around at night in the fields around a small town in Michigan. Our destination was a junkyard tucked away behind several fields, home to rusted-out cars, semi-trailers, farm equipment, etc. We were cutting through the fields to avoid the trigger-happy farmers that live around there. Just about there, and we were foiled by a stream too wide to leap. It was late autumn, and wet feet would be uncomfortable, so we backtracked into the adjacent field. From our corner of the field, there was a tree line that ran east-west, and southward, the land rose into a large hill. We stood for a moment, discussing our options, when my eyes were drawn to a large white boulder, which seemed to glow a bit in the moonlight. It was around 75 yards away, and I was idly staring at it when it moved. It unfolded, standing up, a 10-12 foot bipedal being, skeletal thin, pure white, with long limbs. For the space of a second, it looked at us, and then it took off. I think it was running, but it may have been gliding or flying, I'm honestly unsure. It crossed the field, up over the hill, a distance of probably 100 yards, in 2 to 3 seconds, in complete silence, and was gone. Only two of the three of us saw it, and after a few minutes of incoherent gibbering, we tried to rationalize, explain, and figure out what the hell we saw, and we decided it must be an alien. A year later, I was at a party, and the subject of aliens came up. I say, "I've seen an alien." And they say, "Yeah, let me guess, in Saranac, right?" I confirm, we exchange mutual looks of awe, and he directs me to this Eric fellow who grew up in said town. Eric tells me that he has seen strange things there his whole life, lights in the sky, etc., but no humanoid beings. Fast forward another year and a half or so, and I get a phone call from an acquaintance who was sitting at work when he noticed a girl staring at him strangely. She eventually walks up to him and says, "I feel like I need to talk to you." She proceeds to tell him that her friend's dad is the head of a vampire clan in a town near Saranac. My friend remembers my story about weird things in that area and asks her if she knows anything about Saranac. She gets very defensive and eventually reveals that Saranac is a breeding ground for dragons. Yeah. To this day, I'm not certain if I saw a dragon, an alien, or a vampire, but I did a bit of poking around, and I heard from a girl that lived there as a kid that she had seen random 15-foot scorch marks on roadsides and in the middle of fields. I lived in the foothills of some large expanses of forests, mountains, etc. My friends and I would always go exploring in the forest areas. We'd take long, extensive camping trips through the mountains, hunt, fish, or forage for our food, and sleep in personally made shelters. We've personally experienced large, hulking shadows during both the day and night. On a few different camping experiences, it'd start pouring or snowing. If we camped early in the spring, the mountain ranges would have weird weather. During these evenings, we'd sneak into an old cabin house that wasn't really inhabited. It was a good place to take shelter from bad, cold weather, and multiple times there'd be no instances. One evening in particular, we had a large animal figure run against the door, trying to break it down. Now, I'm personally 6'2" and 265 pounds, but this figure looked at least another foot or two larger than us. We went scouting one time, wanting to make a funny mock horror movie about a crew of people going out to make a horror movie about Bigfoot, only to be attacked by it. We spent 2 weeks on a field scout expedition about 25 miles away from any of the small towns we lived near, and it was pretty harrowing. Our campsite was ravaged every night. We had lost all of our food and water by the 8th night. We lost our fishing poles on the 12th and our bullets for our hunting rifles the next day. The time we lost our bullets, we buried them. They also included filter tablets, and we were terrified about losing those, and placed an identifiable stick over them. The next morning, a hole was dug, and our pouch was gone. Needless to say, we didn't go back out to actually film the movie and decided to just put the production money we had towards drinking and hanging out. I am a hunter in Minnesota and know a lot about wildlife in Minnesota and Wisconsin, but one day at the cabin in northern Wisconsin, I saw something I couldn't explain. I was walking through the woods with my cousin, just off the trails. I knew that forest like the back of my hand and therefore felt comfortable there. Not so much anymore, though, because as we were walking, my hunter sense kind of started to hit, and I felt like we were being watched, maybe stalked. These are thick woods, so I whispered to my cousin to stop moving and be quiet while I scanned the woods. Mind you, this is broad daylight. Then I saw something odd, a slight movement 50 yards or so out, along with the snap of a branch. Also in the process, I saw something in that direction that appeared to have reddish-brown fur. When the branch broke, my younger cousin got nervous and bolted for the main trail, only 20 yards away. I ran with him and could hear crashing noises with ours. When we reached the trail, I paused to try to see the animal again, this time with better success. I saw something that appeared to be about as tall as me, 62 inches at the time, looking right back at me with reddish-brown fur and an almost human-like posture, but was lightly hunched and had black eyes. We made eye contact, and I had the distinct feeling that it wanted to hurt me. It was at least 50 yards out, but my cousin had paused to look as well and had seen it, but she won't talk about it to this day. We only had to run about 200 yards to get to the cabin, but that was the longest 200 yards and probably the fastest I have run. I know it was not a bear, its body profile was too slender, and its snout was not elongated enough. In my teens, I started seeing an orb. Just one orb, but it was a black orb. It was literally darker than the shadows in my house at night. I mostly didn't have a problem with it since it would always move away from me. I'd just wait till it was moved on, then go on with wherever I was going. Then one night I was laying in bed when I suddenly felt a blinding pain in my right eye. I felt like someone had punched me. There was no one in the room. I ran to the bathroom, turned on the light, and looked in the mirror. I looked normal. There was no bruising, but just touching the skin around my eye hurt, and it felt like there was a massive bruise on the soft tissues. Every time I blinked, it would send a fresh wave of pain through me. I went back to bed and laid down again. Then it felt like someone or something was poking me, jabbing at the bruised feeling with their finger. I rolled to the left. The poking feeling stopped for 2 seconds, then started up again. I rolled to the right, burying my bruised eye in the pillow. The poking stopped for 2 seconds, then started up again. It was like something was reaching through the pillow just to cause me pain. I finally sat up, feeling royally pissed. I said out loud, "Stop it. You do not have permission to touch me. You do not have permission to hurt me. Get your effing hands off me." There was a pause, and then the poking sensation stopped. The pain in my right eye began to fade. I lay down again, and I fell back asleep. The next morning, my face and eyes felt fine, and there was still no evidence that I was bruised or physically injured. A few nights later, I woke up to the silhouette of a tall man wearing a hat standing next to my bed. I researched later and found it was a hatman shadow person. I don't know how I pulled it off without getting tangled in my blankets or anything, but I basically jumped to my feet so I was standing on my bed and stood face to face with it. I couldn't see its face or eyes, but I swear we were face to face, and I just stared right back at it and didn't back down. Then it disappeared. I got some sage and basically saged the whole house. Every door, every window, then the actual room, cleansing it with the statement, "Negativity and malignancy are not welcome here." I sealed this portal or room against them. The house felt lighter afterwards. Then I held the sage under my face and said, "Negativity and malignancy are not welcome." I shielded my body against them and took a huge breath of the sage smoke. It's weird, but even though I get really bad allergies to smoke and just about everything else, the sage smoke didn't trigger those allergies. And when I exhaled, I felt better too. I never saw the orbs or the hatman again, and I was never hit in the eye again. In the middle of the night a few years ago, I saw a figure pass in front of the glow of the alarm clock and into the darkness at the foot of our bed. I thought it was an intruder. I had awakened because I thought I heard our apartment door open and close and then saw the figure. At first, I thought it was my husband, but when I inched my foot over to his side of the bed, I felt him next to me. My heart was pounding so hard that I could hardly hear anything else. Till then, I had always thought it was silly when someone felt afraid that people could hear their heart pound. I get it now. So, after about a minute of staring into the blackness where the figure had disappeared, I grabbed the bedside lamp and threw it at the foot of the bed. I heard it crash into the wall. Leapt out of bed. I grabbed the flashlight on the dresser. Dropped it. I made 2 huge steps to my left and turned on the bedroom light. No one was there. Just my husband staring at me like I had lost my mind, and the lamp lying on the floor. I explained what happened. He made a sweep of the apartment, even though the bedroom door was shut and the apartment door locked, and there was absolutely no way anyone could have entered without making every single floorboard in that old apartment creak to wake the dead. It was 3 a.m. or so on a Saturday, so we got up for some hot chocolate and watched a few episodes of Frasier until we were both able to calm down. I've had sleep paralysis before, and this was nothing like that. Lucid dream? Maybe. Who knows? In August 2004, we ventured to a pretty well-known location in Pennsylvania. Pennhurst State School. The place oozes pure malevolence from the second you set foot on the property. The amount of human suffering that occurred on the grounds is unimaginable. You can literally feel the agony that the people who were condemned to the asylum's hellish conditions had to endure. The place was opened in 1908 and acted as a place where people would dump the mentally challenged, deformed, insane, or somehow otherwise deemed unfit for society and then forget about them. By the mid-1960s, Pennhurst had been open for 50 years. It housed 2,791 people, most of them children, which was about 900 more than the administration thought the buildings could comfortably accommodate. It was overcrowded, filthy, and severely understaffed. By the 1980s, overcrowding, a lack of funds, inadequate staffing, and decades of abuse and neglect accusations had caught up with the operation, and in 1987, Pennhurst closed its doors for good. The place is made up of several different buildings situated on a massive plot of land. At the time I was there, the buildings were still littered with remnants of the past. Personal possessions are still in a lot of the rooms, old gurneys here and there, beds, strange medical devices, and an old dental chair adorned with reatrons that they used to pull the teeth of patients who would bite, just to name a few of the oddities. I cannot convey via words the overall vibe and feeling of sadness and pain the place gives off. The building we were in at the time of the incident I am about to explain is named the Mayflower Building. We had been inside for just about an hour or so, checking out rooms and speculating about this and that. Our EMF detector had a pretty dead reading as we made our way around the bowels of the building. Suddenly the EMF spiked like crazy, and simultaneously all flashlights and cameras died, despite having fresh batteries in each. So there we were, fumbling in complete and total darkness while in the depths of a long-abandoned mental institution, trying to figure out what happened and get batteries into the flashlights so we could see, when a low gurgling growl erupted from one side of the room. We all immediately froze, and our chatter went totally silent as we listened to this thing gurgling and growling at us from within the darkness. After a few moments, although panic-stricken, I was able to compose myself long enough to get some batteries in my flashlight, turn it on, and immediately flood the area the sound was coming from with light. What we saw was a figure, thin and bony, ribs protruding, kind of hunched over, standing roughly 6 feet in height, pale, naked, bald, twisted, and deformed, with overly long, gangly arms hanging by its side. It looked straight at us with a sickened, skeletal-like face and black hollows where there should be eyes, and then it vanished with a loud pop and in a puff of what looked like black milky smoke that dissipated within seconds through a solid wall in a swirling pattern. The feeling I got from it was suffering and hatred. We were beyond terrified and quickly exited the building with much haste. A lot of hyperactive yammering occurred between us on the car ride home about what we had just seen. To me, it looked like a severely malnourished, mistreated, and neglected patient. Its skeletal face, deformed body, and black hollows for eyes are something I will never be able to get out of my head. It took me weeks to even be able to shake the feelings of despair and suffering this place gives off. Pennhurst is a place that, once visited, will leave you a different person than when you went in and will stick with you for the rest of your life. When I was young, I used to stay at my great-grandmother's house over the summer. This was an old southern house that had been around since World War I. So one night I'm in bed trying to get some sleep, it's summer, and it's balls hot in a house where there's no AC built in, when I see a woman walk through my door. My closed door. She was in a white dress or nightgown and moved around the room as if she were getting ready for the day. I watched for what seemed like forever, then suddenly she stopped mid-step and slowly turned my direction. At this point, I'm scared shitless and thinking I'm going to die. She finally sees me. I looked at her face, and then I looked into her eyes, and as soon as I did that, I blanked out. When I come to, I'm on the patio, the sun is rising, and I have no clue how I managed to get there. I stayed on the patio, I wasn't going back in the room, until my great-grandmother woke up and began breakfast. While eating breakfast, I tell my great-grandmother that I saw a ghost. She said, "Baby, what does this ghost look like?" I describe it to her, and she looks at me and says, "Oh, that's just your aunt so-and-so." My response, "What?" Later that day, she gets an old photo album out and shows me a picture of my dead aunt, who died in the house way before I was born, along with a few other dead family members. Then she went on about how she sees them from time to time. I never spent the night there again, and I never went into that room again. This isn't paranormal, but it's creepy. We used to live on a farm when I was younger. We didn't have any animals except a dog and a cat. It was a lovely place and everything, but my mom often said that she felt like someone was watching her when it got dark outside, even though we had never seen anyone outside. Some years ago, our dog died, and we got a new one. A German Shepherd. It was both for guarding, training, and fun. As the dog grew older, it started to bark at something in the distance almost every night. It got along with our cat, but we came to the conclusion that it was the cat anyway since it didn't have to be caged like the dog. Months went by, and my sister got a boyfriend. He used to hang out at our place a lot. One night, when he was about to go home, he felt like he wasn't alone. Right before he got to the car door, he turned around because he thought he heard something. The moment he turned around, he heard footsteps running behind him. He turned around once again and saw someone dressed in all black clothing running faster than ever away from him. He jumped into the car, locked the doors, and drove home. After that, we became more aware of what was outside our windows and checked outside if the dog started to bark a lot. I went to college in Richmond, Kentucky. Right outside of Richmond is an old plantation-looking place called Whitehall that my friends and I decided to visit very late one night. My friend, who we'll call Susan Finkelstein or Sue for short, gets the idea to see if she can provoke any ghosts or spirits or what have you, as there wasn't a lot going on and she really wanted to give this a shot. Note that we did not even enter the property, so no trespassing was committed. So anyway, Sue starts making some seriously racist jokes at the expense of slavery, beating slaves, etc. This goes on for about 20 minutes of her just having a good old time, talking about when she owns her own plantation and how it'll be a gas to beat slaves and then beat them again when they bleed on her cotton. And that's when the story gets interesting for us. Sue was standing at the fence while giving us her small business loan plan for this plantation, and all of a sudden she starts bitching at my friend Jay for blowing on her neck. Oddly, though, Jay had been absent-mindedly exploring some location near some trees on the road and was at least a good 30 feet away, not quite enough distance to whisper sweet nothings into one's ear or blow on the neck. Sue dismisses this and continues her tirade, attempting to provoke some sort of response from the absent ghosts. Suddenly she gets very quiet and then starts complaining that her back is hurting, almost on fire. My, now ex-girlfriend lifted up her shirt to see what the problem was and went pale as something pale. On Sue's back were a series of lines that appeared as though someone had beat her severely with a fly swatter or something, the old metal kind that leaves nice lines. We hightailed it out of there in a hurry. About 8 years ago, my friend and I were visiting family in Tennessee during a long weekend. He and I drove there in his Jeep, which was built for off-roading. We had planned on taking it off-road one of the days, but in North Carolina. One morning, we took the top off the Jeep and headed towards the mountains. Everything is going smoothly. The weather is perfect, we knew exactly where we were, we both had a full charge on our phones with a strong signal, you get the idea. The mountain we were looking for had public trails meant for custom off-road vehicles. We came to the start of the trails, or so we thought at the time, and continued our adventure. The trail breaks into two. Both directions look commonly used, so we decide to take a right. We don't want to make too many turns because we need to remember the way out. About an hour passes, and the cell signal drops to 1 bar. I didn't like this, but we kept on trucking. The trail becomes more inclined and narrow. The wheel tracks from previous vehicles disappear, and signs of human civilization are nowhere to be found. Since the trail, or lack thereof, was too narrow to turn the Jeep around, we kept going in hopes of finding a larger space to maneuver it. It's about 4 o'clock, and I'm really wanting to be off this damn mountain. The shade from the trees makes it seem later than it is, and I don't want to be lost at night. Suddenly, something in my peripheral area catches my attention and puts me on high alert. I turn my head to try to find whatever it is, and I see a damn kid crawling up the hill. The trees and brush are thick, so I was surprised I even saw him at all. I wasn't sure of his age since he seemed to be covered in dirt and weighed no more than 100 pounds. I told my friend to stop to see if this boy needed help. I yell out to him, "Everything all right? Are you alone? Do you need help?" But he just stood there, staring. He had no shirt and no shoes. His feet looked like he was walking through a coal mine. His pants looked thin and had several large holes in them. Then, on the other side of the Jeep, comes another kid. Young boy, same characteristics, same type of clothes. So my friend asked him if he was okay. No response. Just blank stares. I'm already uneasy, but this made me downright uncomfortable. To add to the creepiness, 2 more kids come out of nowhere. Then a few more, some very young girls, some teen boys, etc. None of them spoke to us. They didn't even respond to hand gestures. While staring at us with blank stares or curiosity, I don't know which, they proceed to move towards the Jeep and form a line to block our path. They start to enclose the Jeep. My friend and I were trying to tell them to move over so we could pass by. They weren't having that. None of the kids had any sort of communication with the others. They all just stared at us. Just stared. And got closer and closer. I told my friend to forget turning around, just throw this SHT in reverse and back down this Deliverance mountain. My friend immediately threw it into reverse and hit the gas. The children of Deliverance Corn continued to walk towards us, not run. We gained distance from them and eventually lost sight of them. We went back down the mountain for about an hour before the trail became wide enough to turn around. We got out before dark, thankfully. I have not been on a sketchy mountain trail since.